Okay, welcome back for our next instalment of The Silver Arrow, and we are on chapter 16 Trees. Slowly and cautiously, they fanned out into the forest. The train disappeared behind them in the fog almost immediately. It was ridiculously thick, as if there was a smoke machine somewhere nearby that was stuck on maximum. The trees were absolutely enormous and they had no branches low down, so they looked like big stone columns in a cathedral. The biggest ones were as thick around as an elephant. It was so quiet and it was almost like they were holding themselves still. There was only one problem. There wasn't any firewood. None. The forest floor was completely bare of branches. Where's all the sticks? Tom said. I don't know, she replied. It was as if someone had come through right before them and tidied up. Kate looked up, and even the lowest branches were lost in the fog. There had to be a way. Without wood, they'd be stranded here forever. Maybe we could chop one down, Tom said. Yeah, except that we don't have an axe, and even if we did, we'd be completely impossible because they're like the size of buildings, Kate replied. True, said Tom. Maybe the heron could fly up and get some branches, thought, though Kate knew the delicate heron could never get as many as they needed. It almost felt like the forest was waiting for something from them. Kate guessed it made sense. Here she was, just showing up like this, expecting to collect armloads of wood for free. Maybe it wanted something back. That was fair, but what? What would a forest want? All right, she said quietly. Hi, forest. We're looking for firewood to make our train go. Want to trade? What can we give you? The fishing cat cocked her head. Who are you talking to? Nobody, Kate blushed. She didn't want to admit she was talking to the forest, but she kept going in her head. We really don't mind, she thought. We're happy to pay. We'd be grateful. And then it was the oddest thing, because a thought appeared in her head. Are you sure? It was a thought, but it wasn't her thought. It came in a voice that felt odd and very gentle and very strong, and not alone, like many voices speaking in unison. It was the forest. She knew it. I'm sure, she thought. And that was that. It started as soon as she thought it. The bottoms of her feet tingled. It wasn't unpleasant, but it gave an uncontrollable urge to take off her shoes. And not just her shoes, but her socks too. Suddenly she was craving the feeling of prickly, loamy soil under her feet. So she took them off. Tom was doing the same thing. The second her bare soles touched the ground, she curled her toes tight right into it. And the really weird thing was, her toes kept going. They were getting bigger and longer. They stretched and pushed down into the cold dirt, like when you bury your feet and in the sand at the beach, but much, much more. She felt them going deeper and deeper into the dirt. At the same time, her legs were getting stronger, and her arms. She was getting taller and taller, growing so fast that the ground zoomed down away from her. It should have been scary, but for some reason it wasn't. It actually felt kind of amazing. Kate suddenly threw her huge arms wide, and as she did, they stiffened, and her fingers spread and multiplied and then burst gloriously into twigs and foliage. She grew up and up and up, and it was as if she was stretching her back after a long sleep. She was turning into a tree. She closed her eyes. She didn't need them. There were so many other ways to sense and feel. Her toe roots went down, 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 winding and finding their ways through layers of delicious cold black earth, as if it were a mile deep chocolate, and at the same time spreading outwards around her in a huge underground web, threading between pebbles and rocks and other roots, rubbing elbows with friendly worms, drinking in delicious chilled clear water that flowed funnily up through her legs and all through her body and fed her finger branches and her leaf hair. The wind flowed past her and she swayed with it like the music. She grew so tall she could stick her crown up above the mist and feel the warmth of the bright sunlight on it. It felt wonderful, like sunshine always does, except that now she was a tree, so she wasn't feeling the sunlight. She was eating it. It was her food and it tasted incredible. And when it rained, she drank the rain, and that was delicious too. Her branches touched the top of the other trees' branches, and their roots mingled underground as if they were holding hands, but with their toes. The cat had become a pussy willow, and the heron was now a lovely grey ash tree. The mumba had become a magnificent African blackwood tree. The porcupine was a thorny honey locust. They all stood together as a grove, and it was the calmest Kate had ever felt in her life. If she'd had to stand there like this as a girl would have been, she would have been bored, silly. But as a tree, she was never bored. She wasn't waiting for anything or wishing she was somewhere else, and she was just here, just now, all the time. Weeks went by while Earth spun like a carousel, and the sun and moon and stars wheeled dizzily overhead. Days and night changed places like a game. Birds weren't afraid of her. They loved her and nested in her branches. A friendly giant, she listened to the frisky low-level chatter of the little plants around her and the shadowy whispering of a fungi below that. It wasn't all fun. There were pain and strife too. Insects and caterpillars fed on her. Birds pecked holes in her. Lightning tickled down and scarred or demolished trees, seemingly at random. Autumn came and she let go of her leaves. It was a relief, really, as she thought she'd been wearing a lovely ball gown that had gotten slightly uncomfortable, and now she was finally taking it off. When winter arrived, she felt the cold but didn't mind it in the slightest, though sometimes the weight of the ice made her ache. She dozed. Then spring came and she was washed by fresh rains and warmed by the sun, and she came alert again. Her glorious leaves burst out like feathers of a beautiful green bird. Years later, when she tasted champagne for the first time, she would remember being a tree in springtime and think, yes, this is what that is like. Summer was a grand feast of sunlight, but almost as soon as it started, something unexpected happened. Was she shrinking? Her head dropped below the mist again, slipping down away from the sun. Her leaves and her branches, her magnificent multitudinous branches, were withering, and her roots were letting go of the soil, pulling back out of it like a ship weighing anchor, preparing to set sail again. And then she opened her eyes, and there she was. That's right, she was Kate. She'd forgotten her name, but that was it. It was Kate, and she was a girl. It was all coming back to her. Everything was so different. She was small and soft, and she wasn't rooted in the ground. She wandered around loose. She could see and talk and move, but she couldn't taste the soil or the sunlight anymore. What a weird way to live. Everything looked the same as it had before. She was standing right in the same spot. The mist, the forest. Did it all ever happen? Was it all a dream? But if it was a dream, the others had dreamed it too. They were blinking and shuffling their feet. Kate felt lost and unsteady, being unplugged from the earth like that. We were trees, Tom said. It was all anybody really needed to say. They walked a little shakily back towards where the train was waiting. Next to it stood a great pyramid of firewood, all stacked neatly. And many old voices thought together in Kate's head. Remember this. Chapter 17. He thought he could. The Silver Arrow's fire was still going when they got back, though only barely. Kate and Tom fed logs into it until it was big and blazing again, and they set off along the branch line, running on wood now instead of coal. Leaving the misty forest behind, the clickety-clacked through miles of empty fields. Kate opened the doors and looked out of the grass skimming past. It was funny. From a moving train, things close to you slipped by so fast they were blurry, whereas the trees on the horizon looked like they were barely moving at all. Then the tracks merged with another set of tracks coming in from the right, so smoothly she didn't even feel a bump. And just like that, they were back on course again, on the main line. They got back to their regular routine, picking up animals and dropping them off. In lush rainforests, flaming autumn forests, frozen Arctic forests of evergreens, dark thorny scrub forests, flooded swamp forests, Kate took a ticket after ticket. As quiet and dignified as they were when they got on, the animals were always excited when they got where they were going. They scampered and loped and fluttered and through the doors the second they opened. The Silver Arrow stopped for ibex and chinchillas. It picked up a massive bison and looked totally bizarre close up, like a bull from another planet, though he carried himself with great dignity. They picked up a pair of mighty-winged, bald-headed condors and black and white banded snake called a Malayan krait, who was so venomous that she made even the mamba nervous. At one station, a delicate, airy glass greenhouse car was added to the train, full of different coloured fluttery butterflies. They dropped it off again a few stops later. Once they rumbled through a long tunnel under a mountain, miles long it felt like. Kate worried for a second that the library car wouldn't fit, but it did. She switched on a light in the cab. Interestingly, or Kate found it interesting, even though there were electric lights on the train, they actually ran off power from a little onboard electric generator that ran itself on steam power. When they finally spotted a light at the end of the tunnel, it wasn't daylight. It was the yellow subterranean light of the subway station. Men and women and girls and boys stood on the platform, all staring down at their phones. The train stopped and the doors opened. A single well-groomed owl stepped on. Kate thought that people might potentially be interested in the fact that a huge steam train full of animals and driven by children had just come roaring into their subway station, but they never looked up from their phones. Not once. They never noticed. It's like they're awake, but they're asleep, Kate thought. She swore silently to herself that she would try to never be asleep herself. Kate spent most of her time in between stops in the library car, where she finished a book about the secret underground school under a school and started a new one. They found a fuel depot and switched back over to coal. She explored deeper into the candy cart as far as the cola bottle section. She never knew they came in more than one flavour. When it was hot, she swam in the swimming pool car, which was exactly as fun as you'd think swimming in a pool on a fast-moving train would be. Tom experimented to see whether he could walk all the way through both dining cars, stepping only on tables and chairs. He could. Kate took pride in keeping the brass fittings in the cab polished and the floor swept. She and Tom were always dropping bits of coals on their way from the tender to the firebox. When she first seen the cab, it had looked a bit like a mess of random pipes and levers to her, but now she could read the Silver Arrow's controls like a book. She felt like She felt like she had a whole new set of senses. Some part of her mind was always keeping track of the water level and the steam pressure in the boiler and the heat in the firebox and how steep the grade was and where the throttle and the reversing lever were set. She totally got the reversing thing now. Steam was old-fashioned technology, but it turned out that you could be a major nerd for it anyway. They chugged uphill, switched backing up into a steep mountain side forest. Grey slopes fell away behind them into green valleys, which wandered off and faded away into the distance. But as beautiful as it was hard work climbing the mountains. The Silver Arrow kept demanding more and more coal and getting slower and slower and slower, till after a while Kate could almost have kept up with it on foot. She didn't want to think about what would happen if they actually stopped, or even worse, started rolling backwards down the mountain. Tom kept whispering, I think I can, to the train, like the little engine that could, and the train kept telling him to knock it off. I'm not designed to climb mountains. I'm not a funicular. I don't know what that is, but tell me if we have to start leaving cars behind, Kate said. I can live without the boxcars, but I draw the line at the library car. I'm not losing any cars. What kind of monster are you? I'm just trying to help, Kate said. We leave no car behind, except maybe the candy car. I'll let you know. Finally, they made it to the top, where there was a pass through the mountains, but this time the Silver Arrow was barely moving at a walking pace. The shadows of the mountains stretched away for miles behind them, spilling darkly down the valley. For one long minute, they were on that level ground, and everybody sat back and took a deep breath. Then the Silver Arrow tipped forward and started down the other side of the mountain. It picked up speed quickly and kept on picking it up. The chuffing and the clickety-clacking accelerated, slowly at first, but then faster and faster. Kate stuck her head out of the window, and the wind hit her in the face. Soon they were really moving, booming down the mountain, faster than they'd ever gone before. Kate and Tom exchanged a nervous look. It was a relief to be making good time again, but maybe this was too much of a good thing. I'm sorry I made fun of you for going slow before, Tom said. If this is your revenge, you've made your point. I'm not making a point. I can't slow down. Where's your speedometer? Kate said. Don't have one. What? Steam engines don't have a speedometer. Were you literally invented in medieval times? How are we supposed to know how fast we're going? Kate could almost feel the weight of the heavy cars behind them, shoving them along. She shut off the steam and tried the brakes, first lightly and then harder. Ow, my brake shoes! It didn't work anyway. She barely felt the difference. It was official. The Silver Arrow had become a runaway train. The cab started rocking scarily back and forth, and they were cutting across a steep slope, and if they derailed, that would be the end. They'd rolled sideways over and over all the way down the mountain. The animals came crowding forward into the cab. We've come to express our concern, the cat said. We're concerned that we're all going to die. I know, Kate said. I'm braking as hard as I can. I almost fell on the porcupine, the snake said. The snake almost fell me, the porcupine said. If you all want to know, the heron said, that if we fall off a cliff, I will survive by jumping out the window and flying away, but I'll remember you all fondly and in great detail. Thanks, Kate said without much enthusiasm. What's your brother's name again? Tom, she said. I'll never forget you, Tim, the heron said. I can't believe birds used to be dinosaurs, Tom said. When Kate put her head out the window again, she saw up ahead the worst thing she could possibly see. They were coming up on a tight curve on the edge of a sheer cliff that they were going way too fast. Their momentum was going to take them right off it. She threw herself on the brake lever and pushed. It's already all the way on. If you can transform into an airplane or something, now would be a good time. That is an unreasonable expectation, the train said. It was too late anyway. The Silver Arrow hit the curve and Kate felt the whole train lean one to one side over thin air. Everybody screamed. Kate clung onto the cab's left side, which was on the inside of the curve. Maybe her weight would make a tiny bit of difference. She could actually feel the train's left-hand wheels leave the track, and for a horrible instant they were riding the curve on a single rail. There was the toe-curling shriek of steel on steel, and for an unbearably long second they balanced there and time seemed to stop. And then the train crashed back down onto the rails and they kept going. The track was straight from here. They rattled down the lower slopes of the mountain and onto the foothills. Kate looked around the cab. Let's never do that again, she said. Agreed, the heron said. Agreed, said the train. As soon as she dared, Kate stuck her head back out the window to see what was coming next. She regretted it immediately. I don't believe it, she said. They'd reached the coast, and up ahead were bright white sand and the wide blue ocean. The tracks led straight down into it. And that's the end of the chapter. Come back tomorrow to find out what happens next.